In this video, I'm going to answer the question, how do we solve a quadratic equation when factoring is difficult, or maybe even impossible? First of all, crying is definitely not the answer. Here are two possible solutions. First of all, you can use a graphing calculator, or you can use a computer device of some sort, because a lot of these calculations are somewhat tedious sometimes to do by hand. But another quick way, another way that will always work, is the quadratic equation. So let me show you what that is. The quadratic equation is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And well, you could be wondering, where's b, where's a, where's c all coming from? This comes from the standard form of a quadratic. So if you remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. And that's where this comes from. A is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the lone term out by itself. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the quadratic formula to solve this particular problem. Now, one thing to note before we start plugging stuff into the quadratic equation, what I need to do is I need to get this whole thing equal to 0. If you've seen my other video on how to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, you'll remember that the first step is always to get it equal to 0. Well, to get it equal to 0, I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. So this gives me x squared plus 5x minus 12 equals 0. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this into the quadratic equation. And so first of all, I know b is 5. So wherever there's a b, I'm going to replace it with a 5. I know that, well, a is 1. 1's kind of like a ninja. You know it's there, but you can't see it. And c is negative 12. That's where I see c, I'm going to put negative 12. So let's plug that in. So I have x equals negative b, so negative 5, plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 12. That's 4ac all over, let's make a straight line, 2 times 1. Now this is all well and good, but the biggest problem is you need to simplify it. You can't just leave it like this, kind of ugly like this. You need to make it simplified. So I'm going to have negative 5 plus or minus the square root. Well, let's see, 5 squared is 25. And let's see, that would be 4 times 1 times 12, or negative 12. Oops, let's fix that right there. That should be, let's erase that. So this should be, apologies, this should be negative 12. So let's see, that, fix it up, be plus 48 all over 2. Continuing to simplify, I'm going to simplify under the radical. So I'm going to do 48 plus 25, which is 73, negative 5, plus or minus the square root, 73 over 2. Now, if I could simplify the square root of 73, I would. But 73 is definitely a prime number. There is nothing you can divide 73 by in order for it to come out evenly. So I'm just going to leave my solution like this. And if you want, you could write it like this. So my two solutions are negative 5 plus square root 73 over 2 and negative 5 minus square root of 73 over 2. Let's do one more. So I want to solve this using the quadratic equation. I'm actually going to show you a slick trick for doing this too to make life a little simpler. So what I'm going to start out is get this whole thing equal to 0. Well, to do that, I'm first going to subtract 18 from both sides. So it gives me 2x squared plus 4x minus 24 equals 0. Now, normally when you're looking at a quadratic equation, you want to look to see if you can factor first. Because, well, factoring is the absolute easiest way to do it. You don't have to mess with radicals, you don't have to mess with plus or minus, and that sort of thing. Well, one thing I do notice is that each of these is an even number. So I'm going to start actually by factoring out 2 from everything. So I have x squared plus, let's see, that's 2x, and that is minus 12 equals 0. And here's something interesting you can do. Since this is a 2, eventually in the quadratic equation it's going to work out. So I have 2 times this equals 0. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Because here's what happens. This 2 cancels, and well, 0 divided by 2 is still 0. So it doesn't actually change my equation. I'm just taking out some fluff, if you want to say it that way. Minus 12 equals 0. So let's see. Can I factor this? PSM? Nah, probably not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the quadratic equation. And here's a tip. When you're learning a new formula, write it out every single time you use it. So negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let me go ahead and label some things. So a in this case is 1, b is 2, c negative 12. So let's plug that in. So I'm going to have x equals negative b, so that's negative 2, plus or minus the square root of 2 squared is 4 minus 4 times 1 times negative 12, caught it that time, all divided by 2 times 1. So that gives me x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root. Let's see, that is 48 plus 4, so that's 52, all over 2. Now instantly I know that 52 is not prime, because 52 is an even number. So I'm going to simplify this radical. So a brief tutorial just on the side. I'm going to simplify square root of 52. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the prime factorization of this. Well, let's see. 52 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 13. And so what I'm looking for in square roots are pairs of numbers that multiply together. So here I have a pair of 2's. So square root of 52 is simply this. I take my pair, write it outside. So it's 2 times 2. Well, the square root of 2 times 2 is 2. And I multiply that by whatever's left. Square root of, well, 13 is left by its lonesome, and so that's it. So this gives me x equals negative 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 13 over 2. Now what I'm going to do, since this has a 2 and this has a 2, I'm going to divide everything by 2 so I can simplify this. So it gives me x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 13. And there's my solutions. If you want to write them out, you can write x equals negative 1 plus square root of 13. And you can write negative 1 minus square root of 13. So rule of thumb, try and factor first. Factoring is a little easier. If not, go to quadratic equation. Pretty straightforward, but always, always, always make sure you get it equal to 0 before you start plugging it in.